Welcome to Estate Planning Nightmares and How to Avoid Them. This is the show which highlights the importance of estate planning and why everyone needs to do it. And of course, the unfortunate consequences of what happens far too often when people have not planned. I'm your host, Jon Braddock, author of Click Here When I Die, and the founder of My Life and Wishes, The Legacy Vault, an online planning and document storage solution created to make things easier for those you love. Today, I have a very special guest, Stephen Michael McClelland. He is a certified elder law attorney and owner of McClelland Law Firm in Central Arkansas. Stephen is one of only 4 certified elder law attorneys in the state, and today he'll share some of the most common estate planning nightmares he's encountered, and most importantly, how to avoid them. He and his wife, Mendy, have 3 daughters, and his hobbies include princess tea parties, Disney movies, and flying as a private pilot, all of which I want to ask him about. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here. Which one would you like to talk about first?
Man, I don't know where to start. It's like, the princess tea party sounds pretty good to me, being the father of several daughters myself. But
Yeah.
I'm beyond my tea party day.
Oh, yeah. Now, it's probably, I don't know what it is, but it's not even real tea. Maybe they take you out for dinner,
Yeah.
It's just air. I get to drink air all the time.
Yeah. Well, my daughters know now that instead of tea, I prefer a bourbon. So, at least they get me to the right location.
Yeah, they're not serving that in the Barbie Dream House these days.
Darn. I thought we'd move beyond that, but I guess not. So, yeah. Hey, awesome. Hey, we'll circle back to some of that. I also want to hear about your flying experience, but I always like to start out asking about people's why. The passion, the thing that gets us up every morning. Why it is we do what it is we do. And in your case, you're an estate planning attorney, certified elder law attorney. You're working with people. What is your why behind what you do, as opposed to being a criminal defense attorney or a prosecutor or one of the other areas of practice within your profession?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that why is really a who. I think most attorneys, it's a who influenced them. And a lot of attorneys will go into an area because they worked with somebody and they liked it. And my who was my partner, who he practiced for about 20, 30 years doing estate planning. And so I took over for his practice when I worked with him as a law student in law school. And then after about 5 years of working with him, he got a very serious terminal diagnosis of cancer. And so I really had to take over a whole lot at that time. He kind of said, look, I want to walk away from the practice and spend time with my family. So I got to see a lot of succession planning in what he did, and he had time to prepare. That's fortunate. Some folks don't. But it's just kind of always, my wife will tell you, I always think like an old man. I've always been a planner. I did do those other areas of law. I did a little family law, but nobody's ever happy in family law. They're fighting, they're upset. I wanted to do something that was more sensible, maybe is the word. I could sit down and reason. So I like the sounding board aspect of it. I think that's really what attorneys are, good ones, is just to say, well, have you thought about this? Have you, thought about that? And I enjoy that a lot more than trying to argue. I don't like it.
I hear you. It's I've talked with several other estate planning attorneys whose previous lives were family law, and they said the same thing. It was like, I'm tired of the fighting. It's nothing but a perpetual fight when you're going through that. And this area of law is pretty much designed to avoid fights. Really?
Oh, 100%, right?
Yeah. So much more proactive.
Oh, yeah. Well, you mentioned my daughters. There's enough drama when I go home, putting out fights. I much rather, keep my professional life as easygoing as possible. So
Oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I always joke with our kids, growing up. It's like we couldn't decide on what to eat for dinner. We couldn't decide on what movie to go see, and there was always the fighting. And so if we now as adults with grown children don't do our estate planning and we think that that kind of fighting won't go on after we die over things and stuff, we are really missing the boat.
Yeah. Oh, I think there's a kind of good quote from Mark Twain. He said something like this: you don't know anybody until you've gone through probate with them. It's kind of paraphrasing what he said. Even siblings, I've seen where siblings fought. I said, okay, so how much are we arguing here? I'll ask the family, and they'll be like, we're arguing over $1,000. And I'm like, your relationship with your sibling is worth $1,000. It's I've seen that people argue, and you put a number on it, it seems silly, right?
Right.
But in the moment, there's a lot of emotions, related to things. So I see it. Yeah, I see it every day.
In our situation, we had two family members fighting over a pair of binoculars. I kid you not. And it was like, are you kidding? It's like, who are you people? I will buy one of y'all
I
a pair of
know.
binoculars, right? And we'll just move on. But the thing that, Michelle, my wife, she brings me back into focus. She's like, you got to understand things of sentimental value to people, right? And so it's like, okay, hey, you're right, as usual. But yeah, I mean, they will fight over stuff. And I've spoken with people who say they have family members they've not spoken with in over 10 years following the death of a parent. So,
yeah.
But this is a great point for you and I, Stephen, to jump in to the deep end, right? So I call the show Estate Planning Nightmares for a reason. I want people to hear what happened. These aren't made up stories. This is stuff that happens to everyday human beings. And sometimes they're good stories and sometimes they're bad, but they're all avoidable. And so through your years of practice, do you have, well, I know you've got thousands of them, but do you have a couple of particular stories you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, one that comes to mind that happened just this year was there was a husband and wife. They attempted to do it yourself. Okay, so the wife took the initiative. I generally see that. I generally see the wife taking more initiative, and so she had.
Well, she's gonna live 7 years longer than he is, so she's gonna need to be organized.
This is very true. Very true. I always tell my wife, you're probably going to enjoy all this when I'm gone. Like, if you're, this is all going to be yours. Do whatever you want to. I wish I could get the same amount of years, but statistically speaking, I know she's going to get more. So in this was a blended family, which there are more blended families than ever. And that when I mentioned my partner, I think he had the golden years, because the golden years were when everyone was married and they had 3 kids. There was less blended families. It's tougher now. It is a whole lot tougher. And there's a lot of unintended consequences, which happened to this family. The wife had 2 kids. Okay. Husband had 1 kid. Okay. That kid had not been in the picture for 40 years, which will come back into play. They had no real relationship with that child. Okay, so the last will, they both printed off a will. So good for them that they knew they needed 2. That was good. She filled out her will saying, if I die, everything goes to my husband. If my husband dies, everything goes to my 2 kids. Perfect, not a problem. Okay. The home happened to be in both of their names, and under our state law, when a wife dies, she died first, it all went to the husband. The home did. Okay. So her will didn't really matter at this point. It's all about the husband's will. So the husband did a will, and he wrote down his name, said, yeah, I want everything to go to my wife. And if she dies, to the 2 children. The problem was that do-it-yourself form, when he read children, he wrote down her children. He wrote down the stepkids. Okay. he didn't write down his biological child. Okay.
Mm.
So she dies, and then he died, and I have this home that's worth 200,000 or so. And the stepkids come to me and say, "Hey, we got this will that says everything goes to us." And so we're asking, well, tell me a little bit about dad. It was a blended family. Okay, well, did dad have any kids? Yes, had one. It was not mentioned on the will. And our state, unlike the states around us, like Mississippi is not like this, Kansas is not like this, but in our state, if you fail to mention that kid gets everything. So the conversation I had with the child, I said, the step kid, I said, look, you're not entitled to any of this. I'm sorry, but I know that's what the will says, but we have this other law that supersedes it. And so you could probate this, but you're likely not going to get anything. There's a chance that when we do find this actual biological child, that she may give some to you, right? There's no guarantee. So they ultimately said, we're going to do this to honor the wishes of our stepdad. And I thought, okay, that's admirable. We filed this probate, and of course, nobody knew where this biological kid was or if they were even alive. We had to use a company and spend like $1,500 or $2,000 to search for her, right? So that took time. And then I had one of those appointments pop up on my calendar, and I'm like, who's that name? That name sounds vaguely familiar. It was that daughter, and I had a phone call scheduled for her, and I was like, all right, we found her. All right, this is going to be interesting.
Wow.
So I explained the situation. I say, here's what your father did legally. He didn't name you. He put technically it's all yours. So I asked her, basically I said, we've got some probate fees and I think some funeral expenses that we want to pay off the top. By this time, the house had been liquidated because nobody actually lived here in the state. So first of all, this person was mad that she didn't know about the funeral because they were that far apart. And I said, well, look, if they knew where you were, they wouldn't have spent like $2,000 to find you, right? So that was like a red flag. It's like, okay, well, if you're going to be mad, you're probably going to be mad, right? But I said, look, here's the thing. You're entitled to all this. Do you want to share this with your step siblings, right? That was clearly what your father wanted. She goes, I don't know. I'm going to think about it and call you back.
Oh, man.
She wanted it all. And I was like, that was, of course, my client, I told my client on the front end, but we just had this law, and if you don't mention your kids in our state, they're considered an omitted heir that, they get what they would otherwise. And being an only child, she would have received everything. So that is a nightmare. Yeah. For one person, but actually like kind of a surprise, dream for someone else. Right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's really challenging. I've never heard of that provision. So, unique to Arkansas, but again, just, you've now given me another story or note to add in here's why DIY is not a good idea.
Yeah. Well, it goes, what we try to impress, and I think all of the estate planning attorneys that you talk to will say this, there is a big difference between legal documents and legal services. And if we reduce what I do to a document, you can get those documents online, but people don't know what they're getting. They don't know that there's a difference between powers of attorney. They don't have that sounding board that is so, we as estate planning attorneys, we've been there. We've seen one generation to the next. And that's really, I think, what provides value there is that if we have to focus on the service, as we as lawyers just focus on the documents, we'll be replaced, right, by automation or people will think, oh, I can just do it themselves. but that's the key. That's the value of good attorneys, to know that service, to talk about pros and cons and say, well, have you thought about this? Right. Certainly you
Right.
got to know Arkansas law, but even beyond that, just, well, what if someone dies before you? That's really the value, I think, of an attorney, to prevent those nightmares, talk about it ahead of time.
Well, it's so many things that people don't think about. So just recently, I had another interview with another estate planning attorney who was telling me the story of this, this family, husband and wife, two small children. Um, they hadn't sat with an attorney who would ask them a whole litany of questions that needed to be answered, such as, what about your beneficiaries on your life insurance, on your pension, your retirement asset, and those kind of things. Well, two young children, the mother, the husband dies. He had never changed the beneficiaries to his wife, who's still listed as his brother, whom he
Oh.
had named when he started. Um, as it turned out, the wife was entitled to a little bit because of some state law, but the
Mhm.
brother got the bulk, a few $100,000. Now, he decided, I'm keeping it.
Yeah, I believe it.
So his sister in law, his nieces have to sell the home, move into, you know, their mother's place for a while and try and make things, because she only worked part time. And it's kind of like you hit yourself in the head and say, what kind of a person would not at least say, look, it was an honest mistake. Shouldn't have made it. Let's split it, or let me, or give
Yeah.
it all to you. Right.
Yeah.
But wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I've seen some families do that, split. But you can't hope that that happens, right? A lot of people do, but I say, well, if you hope that's going to happen, you think that's going to happen, let's just write it down. Let's just put it in writing the right way. And just it's hard. I think half of Arkansans have no estate plan. Statistically, those over 80, 20% have never done a plan. There's just a huge need for it in our state.
So they all have a plan then,
Well,
because they either have one that they had help creating with a professional estate planning attorney, or they have the one that the state's going to give them, which
right.
is, we, the state, are going to make all the decisions for you.
Yeah, that's a big one. And I remember when I was in law school, I got married in June, and then that fall I took the class on wills and all that, and they said, "How many of y'all have been married? How many of you have been married within 3 years?" And I raised my hand. I was, yeah, it's me. It's like been 2 months, And they said, under our state law in Arkansas, if you've been married less than 3 years, not everything goes to your wife. It's kind of split between your parents and your wife. I thought that's a crazy rule. And I was like, I don't want my parents to get anything. So I ran home to my wife and said, honey, I want to make you a will giving you everything. And she's like, what's going on? So yeah, there's little, they're trying to, they have a default rule for blended families and not, and it's not perfect. So yeah, it's a nightmare.
Yeah. Wow. Well, the value of working with a professional. What you got something else scary back there?
Um, I remember one of the first phone calls I had when I actually felt like a lawyer. Like I don't know who this woman was. She called. She was crying, just crying on the phone. Her husband had died, and she was just she said she could barely talk. She said my husband has died, and he bought the house before we were married, and he's got kids. They're threatening to kick me out of the house. They're yelling. They're just saying I'm a terrible person. Um, and I said, wait a second, you're still entitled to a homestead right in our state. And she said what? And I said, yeah, our state. I know every state is different, but yeah, if you're married, a wife has a homestead to stay in the home as long as she lives. And that was the first time that in like a phone call, like like a 7-minute phone call that I had completely changed this woman's total outlook on life. I mean, this widow was, just feeling like she lost her husband and her house and her home, had to find some other place. And I wish they would have talked to a lawyer ahead of time, and they could have done some better things for her, but at least she wasn't going to get kicked out. But I'll never forget that phone call. Boy, that was there was so much emotion, for one phone call. And but she was definitely relieved to know that sometimes the law is good. I said the negative things, but sometimes there's a catch-all provision that can help. But you don't want to leave your last wishes to chance, and that's kind of what happened there.
Yeah, absolutely. But a positive ending, for her, thinking, okay, husband's gone, now I'm gonna have to sell the house and everything. But because of this homestead exemption,
Yeah,
she gets to stay.
yeah, worked out. But
That's positive. That's
but
positive.
but you really want mom and dad to tell their kids, hey, I want to take care of my spouse now. She's going to get the home. That conversation should have been there to set, the wife up for success,
Right.
not set her up for, just chance. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's important. And, we don't really think about it. I mean, the 50% of, Arkansans or Missourians or, Arizonans or any other state you're in, right, who don't have a plan. We don't sit around with our spouse unless we're trying to do a DIY. And we sit around, all right, well, what do you want to have happen if I die? And what do you want to have happen if you die? And what about the kids? And, Michelle, in my case, we have a blended family. We have 6 between us. Um, and, so it's important. There's a very well laid out, crafted plan that, ultimately is fair and beneficial to everyone. And as a guest I had on the show not that long ago, he said, but always remember, fair does not necessarily mean equal.
right, that's very true.
And
But think of how many stories you've heard, how many you've told. I don't necessarily blame the average person who has never been exposed to it. I mean, clearly you've been exposed to it. I've seen so many stories. Of course, our plans are going to be great. But even in one of I've got 3 different offices. There's one area, there was a lawyer that did estate planning. He did a little bit of this and that. He had nothing when he died. A lawyer who had multiple pieces of property. And so, it was like the cobbler whose kids have no shoes. There's even lawyers walking around that haven't done what they're supposed to, and they're helping other people. And so it's not surprising that, this is a statistic. This is true about Arkansas. I had somebody in my office look at all the filings for probate in the entire state the last 10 years. Okay. It took them like 3 days to look at all the
wow.
statistics. And the sad thing in our state is probate cases have actually risen by 27% in the last 10 years. So whatever lawyers are doing, estate planning attorneys or the do-it-yourself, they're not doing it well, or it's not getting done because we're seeing more and more probate cases. And it's not like Arkansas has had like 27% increase in population. Like,
Right.
it's not, there's been other states that are probably people are moving to. And it's, so that's alarming to me that I would expect those numbers to decrease. And that's what I hope, by doing this podcast, by talking to people, getting the word out that you run the risk of probate. In our state's probate's terrible. Other states, their probate process isn't as bad. Ours is pretty old, and it's expensive, and it takes a lot of time. And so that's the big thing that we try to help is how can we avoid probate? Because if you've gone through it, you don't want your kids to go through it.
Well, yeah, it's what I tell people all the time. It's like, well, isn't an estate plan expensive? It's like, well, look, here's the thing. It's going to depend on who your attorney is, what state you're in, how complex your life is, and those things. But you're going to spend a few $1,000s, maybe 5,000, to get an estate plan done. But if you don't, your family's going to spend 5 times that at least going through probate when you die. So
we asked them, well, there's price and there's cost. Price is what you pay, cost is what your kids pay. So, I mean, I'd do a will for people. The price for that is nothing. I'd do it for free, because the truth is lawyers make more in probate. Like the cost to the kids is probate. So, most of our clients say, look, I want this to be as simple as possible. So I want to pay for that. I want to set my kids up for success. And so I don't think that, they say it's expensive. I think it's the best money you can spend, right? Because what else can you leave this world and not have a mess? That says something about, who you are as a person, to get your affairs in order.
Like you said, I mean, everyone at minimum should have a will. It's inexpensive, but there's still going to be a cost on the back end of that. Have the trust, and there's not. And I talked to one attorney a while back, and who will forever remain nameless, but said when he started out in the business, he wanted to do, trust work. And the founding partner said, we do wills because the family will come back to us for the probate.
Yep.
And this guy didn't stay with that firm very long because he wanted to help people avoid probate and the nightmares that go with it, right?
I even had an attorney. There's an attorney who said they did wills, but they wanted to refer probate to me. And so I said, what do you mean? You do wills, why wouldn't you do probate? And when I talked to this attorney, they didn't realize that wills had to go through probate. I said, you got to be kidding me. So that was a surprise to me. I think, that's what happens when, maybe you're a criminal law attorney or you do civil or family law, and you try to keep helping the family by doing like an extra document. Like, oh, I'll do a simple will for you. But so I think nowadays you just gotta, when you need a foot doctor, you see the podiatrist. You need a heart transplant, you see the heart surgeon. Your general practitioner is not going to do those things. And so that's my caution. Find someone who really knows what it is they're doing. Because sometimes they will say they'll do stuff and they don't even realize what it actually means, which is scarier than anything. Probably.
Well, yeah. I mean, if it's worth doing, which it is, then it's worth doing right. Right. Period. So, it's as you know, I had rotator cuff surgery about 3 months ago. My internal medicine doctor did not do that. The orthopedic did that, right? So,
anyway. My wife has a saying. She's in medicine. She's a medical provider, and if you need a doctor and in a clinic has 2 different physicians, you ask which one is the hardest to get into. you don't ask for the doctor who's free that afternoon, right? Yeah. And that's probably true about lawyers too. If you don't have to wait, that's probably not a good sign.
Very good point. Yeah. Very good point. Hey, great stories. Hey, let me ask you another question. We'll lighten it up.
Okay.
You're a private pilot.
Yes, I am.
How did that, have you done it for a long time? It was a hobby? Was there something that you just said, man, I want to soar with the birds?
Soar with birds. Well, I don't know. It was during COVID, and there's not a whole lot to do. And I thought, hey, I'm going to try this out. I took one of those discovery flights, and being a pilot, most pilots are very rigid and structured. They kind of like engineers, right? They make good pilots because there's checklists. It's not, I don't know what most people think, but your pilot who flies your plane, you want them to be pretty structured, right? So It kind of fit my personality, and it's been kind of fun. I have family in Tennessee, friends in Tennessee, and family in Kansas. So to fly there in half the time it takes to drive is pretty nice. And set autopilot on, and best trip I took, a buddy of mine, he and I flew down to the beach for the day. So we landed at Gulf Shores, spent the day at the beach, and came back in time to pick our kids up from soccer practice. That was a pretty cool day.
That's awesome. I've got some friends that are pilots that uh, they're called like breakfast flights or things where they'll take off from their airport at 6 in the morning or whatever, and they'll fly an hour and a half to one of these airports on the other side of the state or next state over that has this phenomenal buffet breakfast, right? They go over and do that, fly back just to keep getting the hours in. And the reason I ask is I've always wanted to fly. And a number of years back, just before my father-in-law had died, I was really interested in doing it. And then life got in the way, and then I started building this company, and so didn't do it. But I took one of those discovery flights. And people asked me about how was it and stuff. I said, it's amazing. $90. I got to sit in the left-hand seat. I got to fly that baby, take it off, fly it all around for 45 minutes or so, and for $90. But then if I wanted to learn how to land it, it was going to cost me another $8,000.
Yeah,
because the instructor said, "I'll take it from here."
Yeah,
for the landing.
That's so true. There's no one that doesn't have a landing, right? It's whether it's a good landing or bad landing, right?
yeah. You're always coming back to the ground.
Yeah. Someone once said, as much as you want to be up in the air, if you have engine problem, you'll never want to be on the ground as much as you wanted to be up. And there's truth to that. And so most pilots are pretty conservative, I would say. They look at the weather, they look at the winds. They have a pretty good pulse on those things. And I think that fits estate planning pretty well. And I can't tell you how many people have come to my office and said, I'm going on a vacation or I'm getting in a plane. And there's something about, do I have my affairs in order when I get on that plane? That just hits them, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of think about my own estate plan every time I'm up there, and I'm like, I'm good,
Yep. Awesome. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights. I mean, estate planning is something we all need to face, and the guidance I think you've provided here today will help so many people avoid common pitfalls. How can our audience connect with you, especially those Arkansans who might want to discuss their personal situation, review what they have in place?
Yeah, our website's a great place to find us at McClellandfirm.com, and we love talking to folks. We try to do that as soon as possible. It's easier to talk to somebody in their 60s than 70s, and better to talk in 70s instead of the 80s. It's just people track better the younger they are, and people realize that. So I feel like we can do a better job the earlier we talk to folks as opposed to later. So that's a great place to reach out. And I'd always say sooner is better than later.
Awesome. And, for our listeners, if you'd like to reach out and contact and connect with Stephen, I'm going to make it super easy for you. I'm going to include all his contact information in the show notes behind or below if you're watching us on YouTube, or probably still below on Apple or Spotify. And a huge thanks to all of you for joining us today. Until next time, this is Jon Braddock reminding you, plan ahead and don't let your legacy become a nightmare.